Thanks everybody for being here. Just a little bit about myself before I dig into the presentation. So, as Gwen mentioned, I'm currently a product designer. I work at Instagram on the shopping team. And shopping is the e-commerce product of Instagram. Our sort of mission is to help people discover the things that they're interested in and love on Instagram, and then enable them to action on those interests. Previous to Instagram, I was actually at RGA as well. I was the associate creative director there, and I led the talent development program for experience design. And I was there for a number of years working on accounts like Nike and Verizon, Samsung, etc. And of course, I am an alumni of the School of Visual Arts MFA program here. It's 10 years actually since I started here, which is kind of crazy. So we were part of the inaugural class. It's really great. I'm super stoked to be coming back here again to kind of give back. One sort of anecdote from my time in the program was I personally found the most sort of value and interest in the design management course. It was taught by Karen McGray, and I'm not sure if it's still a course here for second years. I just felt that it gave the most sort of practical sort of wisdom of all the courses. I mean, all the courses were great, but that one in particular just helped. I felt really helped me prepare my resume and my portfolio, but also just how to approach interviews and how to approach just general sort of courtesies of talking to and speaking with professionals in the field. So I'm hoping that some of this will also be, we'll have a similar experience with you in imparting some of that wisdom. So tonight we are going to talk a little bit about portfolio basics, just going to kind of cover the general sort of themes around portfolio. We'll talk about how to structure a portfolio and in a way that will make you the most successful. We're going to talk about presenting your work. So it's not, your journey isn't complete after you've finished the portfolio. You actually have to, hopefully you get to the interview phase and you actually talk about your work. And then we'll leave some time at the end for any questions that you may have. So before I jump in, a lot of this is actually just an encapsulation of my own personal experience in interviewing and reviewing portfolios. Of course, everybody's a little different. Every company is a little different in terms of how they hire and what they look for. And so this is just a lot of sort of personal experience in doing this through Instagram, Facebook, and also through RGA, and just kind of like lumping them all together in what I think are sort of like the top hits of what you should know about portfolio design. Okay, portfolio basics. So the job of the portfolio is really to get you in the door. I wanted to highlight a little bit of the internal process, right, of what a company sort of goes through when they try to find talent. Talent is, it's very competitive. You may think it's very competitive from your standpoint, but from the company standpoint, it's also very, very difficult to find and recruit the top talent in design. It's super competitive in New York, especially, and also in the Bay Area, of course. And so being able to gather as many different candidates as possible is actually the first step in all of this from the company's point of view. So that's like the sourcing phase, where a lot of times recruiters at larger companies in particular will send out a note to designers who work there and just ask them, hey, just send me a bunch of names of people who you think might be good here. And that's kind of how it starts. So a lot of times you may get cold calls or just recruiting messages from people. A lot of that comes from this. It's people pooling together names so that they can reach out to you. So when I said that the portfolio is about getting you in the door, this is the door, right? The recruiters or the HR professionals, whoever, once they have a bunch of names, they have to kind of go through them and review their applications. If you applied yourself, you're also going through this same door. But if you were just sort of like, your name was dropped and the recruiters have to kind of go through your work, this is when your portfolio is going to help them determine whether or not you're fit for the role. So if they think, okay, this person looks like they're qualified, then they go out and recruit you, right? So that's when you start getting the emails or the phone calls, maybe. I don't know if they still do that. Mostly LinkedIn messages or emails these days, and they try to get you interested in the role. If you are interested, you may go through a screening phase. This is optional. This doesn't always happen at all companies. I think the bigger companies tend to have a more sort of like rigorous process, and so screeners are set up actually to help the companies sift out the candidates who they think have the best chance of being successful. It's actually it's a huge time investment actually from the company standpoint, because a lot of people are involved, and a lot of the people who are involved who are doing the interviewing, they don't actually do this on their day-to-day, right? Like I do a lot of interviewing, but my daily responsibilities are to my product team. And so it's a huge time investment. We want to make sure we get the right people through the door so that when we do spend time with these candidates, it's time well spent. And then finally, you go through the actual interview, right? So this could be over a video conference or it could be on site. But this is when you meet the team, you have your conversations, you present your work, and then after that, that's when they decide whether or not you'd be a good fit. So we talked about the door, right? That's when you use your portfolio to grab the attention of the recruiters or the hiring managers. And then through the screening and interview phases, and we're going to talk about this later, that's when you actually have to talk about your work. And that's when the presentation kind of comes in. So how should you approach designing your portfolio? So there are sort of like, I think across the board, universal truths about how you kind of approach this. The first thing that you should keep in mind is you really only have about 5 minutes to make an impression, maybe even less. We go through a lot of portfolios. We, as in the interviewers or hiring managers or recruiters, tons of portfolios. We just don't have the time to kind of spend on each single one and kind of go through them in a lot of detail. So we're mostly just kind of skimming. We're looking for cues. We're looking for visuals to help us determine whether or not this person could actually be a good fit at the company. So you have to make your mark in that amount of time or less. The second point is around site templates. I think for the most part, this is probably like a 95-5 situation where 95% of the time your site template or your site design actually doesn't really matter. You may be applying to, I don't know, Squarespace or something, and that might actually matter a little bit. So for the most part, my recommendation here is to stick with basic site templates. Don't spend too much of your time on this, because the important part is actually the work. The Chrome should really be dialed back, right, so that your work can kind of come through. So don't make that a distraction. As long as the site is usable and we can kind of go through it easily and find the information that we need, that's a success. And then the third point, which is actually the most important one, quality of craft. This is probably the most important thing you need to show in your portfolio. The portfolio ultimately is a visual representation of your work. And as designers, the sort of visual nature of what we do is really important to highlight. And so you have to be able to show that you sweat the details and that you can show that the work that you're producing is better than everyone else's, essentially. That's what it comes down to. So there are other ways that you can sort of like tweak your portfolio to sort of give yourself the best possible chance during the process. So you can tailor your portfolio a little bit depending on what the role is, and you can get hints at that by understanding what the role is and what the responsibilities are. The job title can help with this, and then also by understanding what the company does. So let's dig a little deeper into job titles. Depending on what you're applying for in a design situation, there are sort of like clusters of types of roles. There are visual UI roles, there are sort of UX systems roles, and there are sort of more hybrid product roles. And these are sort of like these are the typical associated job titles that go with that. So by knowing what type of job or what type of role or job title you're applying for, you can start to understand what kind of content to filter into your portfolio and what to really focus on. So if you're applying for a visual UI role, you probably want to show examples of really strong typography, color theory, and branding, right? If you're applying for more of a traditional UX, interaction design role, then maybe it's a little bit more on the research side, a little bit more on usability and prototyping. Product design roles are a little more ambiguous, I think. I think different companies use product design, the title, in a lot of different ways. But in a traditional sense, especially if you're applying for a job in tech, in-house tech, then you want to really focus on hybrid skills. You need to be able to show a little bit of everything, really. So some visual design, some UX thinking, product thinking, and of course, prototyping. So you're going to see prototyping is actually on all of these. I personally think that prototyping is essential to show in your portfolio. And we'll go into that a little bit later as well. So the other way you can sort of tweak and tailor your portfolio is by company. So the example I'll use here is if you're applying for a job at Instagram, everyone, or I'm sure you all know, that Instagram is predominantly a mobile app experience on Android and on iOS, which means that if you're applying for a role there, you need to be able to show that you have mobile design skills. That's what we look for. I mean, that's our bread and butter. And so if we were to hire somebody who to come in to be able to work in that environment, they need to be proficient in that space. So the same goes for if you're applying for a job in game design or enterprise software. Being able to kind of like selectively curate your portfolio and show the kind of work that they're looking for is going to help, at least a little bit. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about structuring your portfolio now. The first thing you need to understand is no one's going to read the entirety of what you write in your portfolio. So this is a classic example of expectation versus reality, right? So you think, oh, I'm gonna write the entire process of how I went from A to B, and it's gonna be like 8 paragraphs long, and it's gonna be great. No one's gonna read that. Most people are just gonna, like I said, they have 5 minutes to kind of go through a portfolio. They're gonna be skimming. But there's still a way, and that doesn't mean that you shouldn't include any sort of written text in your portfolio, right? You can still include some text, but I think the important part here is actually the framing of it and to structure it in a way that is easy to follow for the reader. So having a very clear beginning, middle, and end is actually super important here. So this simple narrative is, in the beginning, you want to talk about why you're doing what you're doing. In the middle, it's how you do it. So this is pretty much just your work, right? You can throw in captions of like what you're actually looking at in terms of the visuals that you're using. But for the most part, this is going to be covered by just the work that you throw in. And then the end is sort of the outcome of everything. What did you learn, or what were the results of what you actually did? So to click into this again a little deeper, in the beginning, you want to set context, and you have to remember that anyone reading your portfolio probably isn't going to have the full context of why you did what you did. So you definitely want to lay that out. My recommendation here is always, especially as designers, you want to focus on the human problems. You want to define what those are and kind of really just spell it out here. I designed XYZ because my team did a bunch of research and we found that people have problems, whatever, pulling down their blinds. So being able to kind of like lay that out is going to help set up why you did what you did in the middle section, but it's also going to help people build a little bit of empathy for what you did, and you didn't just kind of like make up a bunch of stuff. So research and data is crucial here as well, especially research, I would say, on this side. If you have any, it'd be great to include here to supplement and strengthen your design rationale. I think most people do this, so I see it pretty often, but just to kind of reiterate, your role on the project is important as well. This is actually doubly true for student work because everybody knows from the company side that in student work, it's mostly team-based work. And so being able to explicitly say, I did this, this, and this in the project, and that the work that I'm about to see is actually created by you is going to help tremendously. Okay, so the meat of the portfolio is the middle, right? Portfolios must be visual, and this kind of harkens back to what I was saying earlier, that the quality of craft is most important here. This really needs to kind of come through. So you don't want to rely on text to talk about all the different steps of what you tried and the design iterations. We just want to see, like, in as high quality as possible, the visuals, which is the second point. I think one of the most common mistakes that I've seen in portfolios in reviewing them is that people will include like the image in their portfolio, and it's going to have like maybe 3 iPhones kind of laid out, and then within the iPhones with the device will be the actual mock-ups that they did, and then they don't include an ability to zoom in or anything. So for me, it's like, well, I can't actually see anything that you designed. I see a lot of white space and iPhone frames, and that's about it. And that's going to hurt, I think. your chances, at least, in sort of like demonstrating that you have proficiency in UI or visual design or whatever the subject matter is. So definitely allow for whatever site template you're using, make sure that it has the ability to kind of zoom in. If you're building your own, obviously, allow that to happen as well. So prototypes, again, super important. I think like 10 years ago, it probably wasn't really a thing, but nowadays, prototyping software is everywhere. It's essential to the job, and it's, of course, going to be much more compelling than seeing a bunch of static mocks. So if pictures are worth 1,000 words, a prototype is worth a lot of pictures. So here's an example. Let's just say I had this in my portfolio. 6 static screens, right? And I can talk about these and say, well, in order to go through this flow, you have to start on the feed. You tap on the image and you open up a tag. You tap the tag, you go to the product page. From here, I can select the size that I want, tap the blue button, the sheet closes, then I land in the shopping bag, and the new item will animate in. The previous item that I had in my bag is going to slide down. I tap checkout, I get to scroll through and review my order, I hit the button, and then I think we're going to have this animated circle, which resolves into a check mark. So if I were to kind of describe that through a portfolio, that'd be really challenging and no one's going to read it. And then, of course, you can do the exact same thing, but just have the video play. I can kind of lean back and just watch. It's going to show the visual design, obviously, and then also the interaction design and behavior of your prototype. So super compelling, of course, to be able to use these. And a lot of times, actually, if you have a prototype and it's fairly high fidelity, you could probably get away with just showing a prototype because it has all the elements in there that people are looking for in the design. So in the end, I think this is actually the part that most people neglect. I've seen a lot of portfolios that start with a great sort of beginning, a lot of great work, but then it sort of just ends there. And there's no sort of like, well, what happened afterwards? So it's really important to actually highlight this and to include it in the portfolio. It demonstrates that not only the work that you've done actually had an impact, but it shows that you care. It shows that you're not just about churning out a bunch of designs and hoping for the best. That you care that whatever you put out into the world actually has an impact on the people that you designed for. So following up with this and understanding what the results of what you did is going to show that you have that sort of proactivity to understand that the work that you've done had an impact. Research and data, again, here is crucial. And this time I would skew more on the data side. If you have data to suggest that the product that you just launched had saw 3% growth in engagement on this particular thing. Whatever that data point is, whatever is sort of like, whatever shows that what you launched had success is objective sort of like facts that the things that you've designed had a positive impact in some way. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to, right? Like, that's what we do as designers. We create things. The things that we create, hopefully, will have a positive impact on the people who are using them, and therefore, we've done our jobs. So if research and data aren't available, and I know a lot of times they aren't, especially if you're not working in tech, this is actually a good opportunity for you to talk about, a little bit more proactively, to talk about what you learned in the process, and potentially even like, if I had more time, how would I do everything differently? And that just shows and demonstrates a level of self-awareness that hiring managers and recruiters look for as well. It shows that you're not always just satisfied with what you put out, and that you're willing to admit mistakes and to learn and grow. So this entire end section has a lot of positives to it, and I want to make sure that people understand that this is actually super important to include in addition to the work. So this is kind of like a fake mock-up of what a portfolio site could be. If this is your project page, the beginning could just be a paragraph, right? You don't have to go into too much detail. Just to, again, frame what the problem is. The middle is the work. It could be a prototype, a couple prototypes, or it could be a bunch of different visual mocks that you want to show. And then you follow it up with the results. And that's really all you need. like I said before, if you just have a bunch of headlines and text, it's most likely people are not going to go through that whole thing anyway. So you may as well focus on the bits that are important and really kind of make sure that your visuals are punchy and easy to look at.
I know in Q&A after, but
Okay, so presenting your work. So again, you get to this point in the process, and it's, your portfolio has done its job, right? It's gotten you through the door. You're having conversations with recruiters, or actually at this point, hiring managers and people on the team. So you want to be able to talk about your work in a way that leverages what you've already shown them through the portfolio. So the point here to make is, and I've seen this a lot as well, don't just show your portfolio at these interviews, make a presentation. Like, take the time to actually create a deck. And I can't stress that enough. There are a lot of advantages to why you should be presenting a deck versus just, here's my website, and kind of scroll through and show people your work. So the first point here is you're in full control, right? Because you created this deck. You know and you understand what the cadence and what the pacing should be, what projects you've kind of got lined up. If you sort of like come in and you just show your portfolio, a lot of times the first question would be like, with the interviewers would be like, which projects do you want to look at? And I think if you lead that discussion and you point at those projects, that might be okay. But I've also been in situations where the candidate wasn't really sort of like taking the lead on that. And so then I'm just kind of like, well, all right, let's just look at that one because that looks interesting. And maybe that's the one that you didn't really kind of like prepare for, or maybe that's the one that isn't your strongest work. It's always better to just know that you're in control of what you're going to be showing in the interview. So the presentation itself is also a nice way to give additional signal to your interviewers. It's not the primary focus, right? We're not there to judge the way that you've created your presentation, but it never hurts to have an additional sort of sign to say, well, this person is really strong in crafting a deck, in telling a story, in walking us through what is important about their work. And being able to do that and having an actual design artifact to showcase that is, again, another thing that's just going to help and give you that extra edge in the interview process. And then finally, I think I alluded to this earlier a little bit, but it's just a lot more natural to go through a linear progression through a presentation than it is to kind of jump through, hit back, go to another project, scroll up and down, zoom in and zoom out because I can't see the text or can't see the images. The presentation is always going to be, full screen, and it's always going to have, as long as you've put the images and laid out the images properly in the presentation, it's always going to be fairly large and easy to look at in a room. So that's another sort of advantage to just using a presentation. So the portfolio is still important because it helped get you here, right? It helped direct how you should be talking about your work and how you should be structuring this presentation as well. So you want to use the same narrative. You want to use the same sort of setup in the beginning, talk about why you're doing this. You want to, of course, show the work and then wrap it up again with your learnings, the results. This time you just have a little bit more, you just have more time to actually talk about each of these things. And so it's just a good opportunity to go into some of the details that maybe you left out in your portfolio. 2 projects is usually the standard, I would say, because most interview presentations are generally like 30 or 45 minutes, maybe an hour. But generally speaking, I think an 80-20 rule here is good, where you want to focus, you want your lead project first. You want to start with that one. You want to spend maybe about 80% of your time talking through that project. And then the 20%, the remaining time, is spent on a second project. And the second project could be one that supplements the first one. So if you demonstrated, a set of skills and artifacts in the first one, maybe the second project highlights some auxiliary skills that you didn't get a chance to talk about and show through your work in the first one. So that way you kind of balance out the work that you show and what kind of skills you have. And finally, you just don't forget to talk about yourself as well. This is also crucial in a presentation. You can have a little bit of fun with this as well. I think people, they obviously want to see the work, but they also want to know a little bit about you. So this is usually a couple minutes at most, but a good way to kind of like introduce yourself and just have a little fun and show a little personality. So to recap, if you were to walk away from this with 3 of the most important things from this presentation, I think the first one is definitely you want to focus on craft. You want to show that you want to push forward your skills and make sure that they come through in the presentation and in the portfolio. You want to use that narrative that I outlined. You want the setup, the work, and your learnings, or the results, with an emphasis on the results, because that's the one I tend to see missing in most portfolios and presentations. And then make a presentation. I think this is actually starting to happen a lot more. I think a few years ago, it was still fairly common for people to walk in and they're just going to punch in their site and you go through the portfolio site. But more and more now, I am seeing a lot of presentations. Sometimes it's just something that's prefaced by the recruiter to make sure that you come in prepared. But I would say that most hiring managers these days are expecting presentations. So you want to make sure you're equipped with that coming in as well. So that's it for the material. I want to leave time also for any questions that you may have. Thanks.